So today's session, we're going to talk about how do we redefine value. We have here experts that have raised their finances. We have experts here working, trying to help entrepreneurs raise finances, investors that believe in ideas and are willing to back that idea with their capital. So I will jump into the smart now. I want to give you guys a bit of facts, figures at the back of your mind so you can think about it while we're having these conversations. Despite women owning 40% of small and medium enterprises globally, and I mean globally, 40% of enterprises that are successful owned by women, we receive less than 10% of commercial financing. Less than 10%. And in Africa alone, that financing gap is approximately $42 billion. Africa has numbers. National Bank, Ethiopia has given us very interesting numbers, and Ethiopian Finance Forum, they have told us that women's number have increased by 54% per time old. Right? Almost, yes, there you go. But now, most women-owned entrepreneurs are still telling us we're struggling to actually access capital. Feven is going to share with us her journey through all of this. But now, today, with these numbers in mind, I want you guys to think, how can we better understand what it means to invest with the mind of women entrepreneurs? Can we come away with concrete insights from women who have raised, who have invested, who have decided to support entrepreneurs? What does it take? What are the challenges? What do we need to do to be ready, to be investable, to actually invest, to trust us to put their monies in our businesses? Are you guys ready? Fabulous. Yes, I'm taking notes and I have like everything printed. I'm a typical consultant. I don't like being wrong. My first question goes to Feven. She's the typical example that I want to put out there when it comes to understanding what it means to be a woman entrepreneur, to have an idea in your head, and what it took her to actually get here today where she is. So, as I mentioned earlier on, I'm going to give you some interesting facts before I hand over this mic to her to give us an answer. 70% of global biodiversity comes from smallholder agricultural farms. And yet, women farmers often go unpaid, unsupported, and unacknowledged. Feven is changing that. A visionary entrepreneur building her brand, Chakka Origins, a supply chain that's rooted in regenerative practices, local value, women-centered. She has taken what it means into a system-level view of entrepreneurship. She has turned Chakka Origins into Ethiopia's trailblazing, and I mean that from my heart, supplier of biodiversity specialty ingredients. My first question goes to her. From your vantage point as a founder, what does it feel like, or how have you personally navigated the challenges of raising finances? But first, a bit of your story to the team.
Thank you for a very generous introduction. Hopefully I'll live up to it. And thank you for having me. I think the ACE Advisors team can all does a really great job of pulling this together. My name is Feven Tsehaye. I'm the founder and CEO of Chakka Origins. I started this company in 2020. And initially I actually didn't really have your typical business plan or financial model. It was really just from a passion of wanting to have access to more natural products. As you all know, and you're familiar from your families, from your grandmothers, and from backyards, there's so much around the use of indigenous plants and traditional plants, herbs and spices that when we used to have access to our own compounds and gardens, you'd be able to grow. But there also is such a limited supply locally with these types of products. And so Chakka Origins was really just to pay tribute to all of the incredible biodiversity that we have within Ethiopia. How do we leverage that? Why are we having to import products that are a lot more expensive, have more chemicals in them, and don't have the same kind of efficacy that we're looking for? And so it was really born from an idea of creating a business model that's rooted in social and ecological impact, but with understanding that to have traceability, to have quality, you really have to invest in the supply chain, which means from the level of smallholder farmers engagement, whether it includes having trainings and seedlings and all kinds of inputs, to really be able to deliver at that scale. A lot of times what we have in Ethiopia is more focus on agricultural commodities, right? Most of them are traded raw. Even our coffee, for the majority, is still traded as a raw commodity globally. That means more of the value of that money is not captured here, it's captured somewhere else in the world, and no one is going to get it back down that supply chain. And so until you can really invest in value addition and manufacturing capacity within the country, we're going to continue to lose out and then pay overpriced products for things that are imported. And so that was one of the areas that we wanted to address with the behavior of Chakka origins. And so over the last 5 years, we've gone through a very tumultuous journey. It's always exciting. And part of that has also really included understanding what it means to build from a place of partnership and collaboration. And I see so many faces in here that have really been part of that journey, including Nasreen and so many other friends, that have really provided ideas and ways to be able to solve for areas where you have gaps. And there will be many. But the goal is to be able to create enough transparency and enough opportunities like this to share and learn from each other, so that the next person that starts a business doesn't have to go through the same kind of hassles I did. And so for us, that meant, so until now we actually have not fundraised, but we started the process of now putting together our pitch deck, and we've had our financial model and done all of the necessary things. But the challenge is that when we are in Ethiopia, and actually this is a very good challenge to my co-panelists here, the ticket size that we look at is very different. So you'll either have like micro level opportunities that are maybe like 20 to 50,000 US dollars, which is mostly for very, very small kind of micro enterprises, to be honest. And then you'll have, for more established firms, anywhere from 2 to 10 million US dollars. And most of us that are in this space are in between. And what happens is that there's usually very limited financing opportunities that are available locally. And when we look to the region or other countries, even compared to Kenya, for example, because of the business environment and many of the legislation and policies in Ethiopia, it's very, very difficult to get investors excited about investing in Ethiopia because they're not sure how to get their money out of the country. But the investor is not there just to give you money. At some point, they want you to grow scale and to be able to get the return on investment. And so it's certainly been a long journey of like learning how do we take a different approach in terms of being able to build and scale perhaps gradually and slowly, but also giving ourselves the opportunity to tap into other types of resources. So we've, for example, previously accessed bank loan just for working capital. And it had actually, and I think Nasreen also knows this story very well, but we had an opportunity through like a USA program to be able to get partial collateral covered through the bank. And we thought, oh, this must be great. So, they'll be much more friendly and easy to accommodate us because at least 50% of the collateral is not covered through the bank, it's through this USA program. We went through the application process, it took months, you have to chase down most bankers. And then when we finally get to like a point of decision making, they told us, we need for you to have like physical land in order for us to give you this loan. And I'm like, it's not even that much money, and it's like so unproportional to what we can really offer. We don't have land, obviously, under our company name, it's none to date. And they wouldn't accept even like machinery or other forms of collateral, purchase orders that we had for export sales, like none of that. And so it is a very, very difficult environment for most enterprises to be able to access funding and financing, and you need to be able to, keep payroll going, keep your lights on, keep paying the tax bureau, and dealing with so many other things along the way. And so it is definitely a very challenging environment. But I think in that process, I feel very grateful to have built an incredible network of people around me that are very willing and able to help in any way, to at least, whether it's through information or sharing data or something that comes out, so that we are piecemealing together the process and the journey. And so, I think I probably used that more than 5 minutes. Nothing looking at it. So I'll probably give a bit more context as we go through the discussions.
I think I'm most than likely circle back on that in terms of a bit more questions. So I want to deep dive into how you have managed to leverage your informal networks to kind of address some of your capital challenges, I guess. But my next question goes to Esete. Esete is a principal partner at Zoscales Partners, one of the biggest top investment firms in Ethiopia, a brilliant analyst, investment advisor. So as Zoscales Esete, she applies various criteria when it comes to investments, deciding how to back scalable and inclusive businesses. Now with this in mind, I'm going to drop an interesting number at her and see how she can figure that out. We found out that only 12% of global private equity professionals are women. Now with this in mind, I know that you have led a multitude of deals across sectors. And so from this experience, what specific patterns or biases, either or, do you still see in how businesses are evaluated and how they are backed when it comes to investment decisions? And then specifically those are women-led, and how have you challenged them?
Wow.
I know.
እንዴት ናችሁ? So that's kind of like how do you challenge them? Now let's be honest. I'm not gonna make up story. So when it comes to gender lens investing, we all need to understand that we are in Ethiopia. Okay, the first thing is we're not in the US, we're not in Europe. We are in Ethiopia. So let's see, how much the private sector has it really grown. Okay, when did we start talking about private sector? Right?
Less than 10 years.
So 10 years, okay, that's a bit yeah. But realistically speaking, I mean, when I was young, at the age of 10 is when the Dark regime fell apart, right? So I've never seen a private sector business in this country when I was a little girl. And then, 1991, we had the coup and so change of regime. Then we had to go through a transition period, very significant transition period. And then, in the early 2000s is when we start to talk about private sector. So privatization agency coming to, for example, Ernst & Young and saying, we need to privatize some of these industries. And still, the government is learning back then. So we start doing due diligences and so on. So I joined EY in 2006 when these companies were about to go privatize. And that's with the support of World Bank and the partner organizations, right? So, we're in an economy that has not seen a private sector. So always remember, we're just learning, right? So the private sector is nascent, this is fact. And then even, really about talking about private sector, when did we have capital market? January 2025, Adem? That's even launch. It's not even there yet. So we have not seen private sector as such. So for us, the challenge is going to be multiplied. It's normal, right? We're effectively learning. Now, coming back to women, again, another fact. Let's talk about fact. Perceptions in Ethiopia or in Africa. I mean, some perceptions in the West have changed slightly. But in Africa and Ethiopia, I mean, how many of you would associate women with career or with businesses? Like if I ask in this room, in the family, if you're asked, how many would say, what does family represent and what does career, who represents career and who represents family people? I mean, can you tell me, when I say family, what would you say? Women, Adem? So 100% of the time, women are associated with family, and then men are associated with career. So we have societal norms, societal structures that are not really pushing women entrepreneurs to come into play. So now, how are we trying to challenge them? First of all, as women, do we want it? Do we really want to get into the private sector, into leadership positions? Do we really want it, or are we backed by certain norms? Because it's normal trend that if people will decide based on information they know, based on people they know. So decisions are made by male-dominated, yes. I mean, I'm glad you said 12%. In Ethiopia, it's probably less than 5. Yeah. I mean, we don't have private equity in Ethiopia. I mean, we're just like maybe 5, 6, roughly. Yeah, exactly. So, and again, it's a learning process. It's a procedure, and so. Let's not be surprised when we face challenges, but how can we shape it? The first step is we need to recognize it. So at Zoscales, even at the beginning, our decisions were very traditional. So we don't have businesses, and on top of that, we add another factor called gender. Of course, from a policy, social perspective, as a social case, we do it. But at the beginning, it was very traditional. So, we just go and to the bankers and say, okay, what are the best businesses? We go into our networks, and the best businesses, or, back then, those businesses that demanded our type of needs, which Feven clearly described as between $3 to $10 million investment that we make, are actually founded by men. So we tend to go there. We go, and making a deal for us was a big deal. Getting the FDI into the country was a big deal. So, but then what did we realize over the years? We realized, of course, we were forced to track numbers, right? We realized that our women led businesses. And I personally even had that bias, because would women really perform well in manufacturing? In service, it's okay. In our healthcare businesses, we're okay with that. In manufacturing, will it really work? I always had that doubt. But guess what? The best performing companies were led by women CEOs. So it's like, so now it's no more a social case. Okay? It's no more, when we talk about gender lens, it's not, of course, yes, the social elements, the moral elements, and so on needs to work, but it's actually a business case. Getting women in the productive sector, producing GDP, is a business case. Now, investors are even saying, if we see gender inclusive or gender balanced institutions, they're willing to compromise on their return. Why? Because it's less risky when you have women in the leadership, women in the workforce, women in the supply chain, women, and so on and so forth. So it's actually an outgrowth of that learning that now, as we raise new funds, we said, no, we need to have this metrics embedded. And on top of that, of course, I don't know how many of you have heard about the gender 2x challenge. There's also an element that investors would be willing to invest in our fund if we are gender 2x. And amazingly enough, naturally, I think it was never intentional, but naturally it just took that we saw both at fund level and at portfolio level, we became gender 2x compliant. Now, when I sit in meetings, do I feel challenges? Yes, absolutely. But then I have to ignore those cultural challenges and barriers, and then I keep saying, okay, what are we doing about women? Do we have it embedded in our screening criteria? Do we put gender in our discussions, in our portfolio management? It's not easy. I remember a year ago, and I'll stop here with this example. A year ago, we said all our portfolio leaders need to take genderless investing 2-hour session. And all of them were like, oh no. Because everybody thought that we were going to talk about sexual harassment, gender-based violence, and yes, it's part of it. It is actually part of it. But there's more to it. It's like the more women come into this sector, the investment sector, the business the leadership contribution to GDP, the better the world is going to be, and the better our outputs will be. So, like I said, all of them, they kind of resisted at the beginning until people start to learn what it actually means. So even at Zoscales right now, we are actually learning about it. It's a new phenomenon. It's a 2018, since 2018 is when we have this gender 2X challenges. And so it's still something that we're seeing, we're implementing, and we hope that it's going to translate into productive, but the challenges are there. I'm not going to deny them. But you just have to speak about it. That's it.
So let's speak more and speak louder on this message that we're getting. But funny enough, from what she said, I had an interesting conversation with a colleague of mine this morning. I won't point fingers. And I was asking him, oh my gosh, we're going to come to our session. He's like, yeah, I told my female colleagues so they can come. I was like, that wasn't actually my question. I was like, are you coming? He's like, but it's not about gender. It's like, it's about genderless investing. So the concept in his head was, if it's gender at the front of it, then it has to be a woman. It doesn't require for the men to be. It wasn't about the issue per se. It was about being about a gender, about a woman. And I was like, we're here trying to create awareness, we understand. And genderless investing is not just because it's a she or it's a her that's sitting there. It's about how can you be intentional in supporting investments that are actually women-led or focus on women practices. As I said, how can we intentionally include it in there? How can you make investment even smart decisions? As she rightly mentioned, the returns are more when it's women. I think I read somewhere that for every $1 that you invest, your returns are $3 for women-owned enterprise. So I'm surprised why most banks, and I'm going to point fingers now, I know we have representatives here from Bank of Abyssinia sitting here, like what are your thought processes? I hope you're keeping numbers in your head when you're making these decisions. How can we support women-owned enterprises? Thank you for letting me make that point to them. Mariah, you're next. So as Esete said very lightly, like the biggest problem that they faced as well when they were making these decisions at first was they wanted to invest, but they couldn't find investable women-owned enterprise. They were all men-led. So I think that's what most organizations or their partners also face in terms of how do we create a pipeline. That was the biggest challenges that genderless investing has been an issue, that we're not able to find those pipelines, right? So Mariah and her team at Renew Strategies are trying to help us solve that problem. How can we make gender-smart access programs work for women, including Ethiopia? And they have designed ways trying to transform the way capital meets readiness in Ethiopia. So first question, I know that you have talked about and you have very actively worked about relational capital. Maybe you can tell everyone here what does that mean? And then how is it that important as much as financial capital, and what does that look specifically for Ethiopia?
Thank you very much. Well, I think that the answers in the conversation that we've already been hearing very much teed me up well to answer that, because I think both of my colleagues here highlighted a lot of the challenges that women are facing in the business world. Feven, as amazing of an entrepreneur as she is, could not do it alone, and mentioned that her networks were very critical for accessing finance and accessing different resources. So when you think about relational capital, it's, do I know the right person in the bank to push forward this loan application that I've made? Do I know the right person in the regulatory office that's going to help me understand if I need this business license or this business license? And a lot of that relationship building doesn't happen at an office, right? Where does that happen? Happens after work. Happens at the cigar bars, the tejbet, the time that people are spending outside of their work. And where are women during that time? They're home, because we have this thing called burden of care that we've already discussed and highlighted when we're thinking about women versus men and the roles that they play in society. And so those relationships are being largely built by the men that have that freedom to be out and about in the evenings at the networking events, grabbing a beer with so-and-so because his friend is the uncle of your cousin who works at Zemen Bank. And so when we're thinking about how do we create a space for women to start engaging in that, you have to think about, well, the men probably aren't going to decide to, take on some of that burden of care unless you have, a very, very special husband who's willing to take care of the children. So are there ways to create events and spaces and bring the right people into the room for these women to start networking with? I think there's still a lot of work to be done, but events like this, and as Nasreen suggested, having more men coming to these events when we're talking about these issues, hosting networking social events that happen while the children are at school and allow women to engage in that. Thinking of ways that you could actually provide childcare, for example, at a networking event or services. And there's an entire industry opportunity there as well for addressing some of that burden of care. And you're starting to see some businesses pop up in that space trying to collaborate and create those connections. But I think all of us, whether we're investors, we're incubators, accelerators, need to be very diligent in crafting these spaces and these opportunities to allow women to start having more and more of those types of engagements, to build those networks, to unlock those different avenues to access the human capital side of that business building that is so critical. So yeah, I think I'll save some more time for Feven because I think...
I'll go back to Feven, but maybe before you hand back that mic, can you add a little bit more, as I said, as you were saying, it's always an issue to find women-owned enterprises that can be supported or that can be invested, right?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Pipeline creation is an issue.
Yes.
You're out here trying, I know I have seen so many programs saying, okay, this program is for women-owned enterprises to do this or that, and then at the end of like a year, they're like, oh, we can find them.
Yeah.
But how do you find them? How do you close that gap in terms of creating credibility? In terms of saying, okay, they may be not meeting this criteria, but we can somehow help them. So how would you close that gap, or what would your recommendation be?
Relational capital. No, but I think that, it's talking to you, it's talking to Feven, it's talking to the women in this room, and they're like, oh yeah, my sister's running X business, it's so-and-so's doing Y. There are amazing women entrepreneurs out there. There's not a lack of women entrepreneurs, but they're not in the spaces where entrepreneurship is being talked about, right? And so it's finding alternative ways to engage in the communities around us to find those women, and then again tailoring the training programs, because I think that's okay. We can have a debate about the value of training because we know that there's too much training and not enough capital being deployed. And I think we're going to get to that a little bit later in the conversation. So I'm not suggesting that training is the answer, but when you think about these programs that you're saying aren't finding women, a lot of these programs are, many weeks back to back. They're full day training programs. And again, we go back to that burden of care. Women don't have the flexibility to participate in those types of programs because they're running their business, they're raising their family, they're doing XYZ else, because we are all multitasking oriented people who don't know how to say no often as well. So we often take on more than any one person should. And so designing programs that meet women where they are flexible, are adaptable to their needs and their pace, because again, everyone's going to have different schedules. Providing other forms of that relationship capital building, like providing mentorship. Maybe they don't need to go through another accelerator, another incubator, but they need to sit down with a woman who is 20 years further along in her business journey and talk through some of those challenges, sitting in the same room as other entrepreneurs that are at the same level of the business and struggling to solve these problems. So I don't think that it's a lack of pipeline, but it's a lack of accessing that pipeline and the strategies that investors need to change the traditional mechanism of searching for them.
Yeah. Maybe I could add.
Yeah.
I could add a point here is, so who's making the decision when it comes to financing, right? So there's that aspect of the network and the market research, but ultimately it's about who's really deciding on which financing goes to who. So is it men that are deciding this? Most of the time, yes. Majority would be men.
Except for that 12%.
Right. Yeah. No. It's.
Yeah.
I mean, we need to talk about facts and reality. So, in actual sense, it's actually men that are in that group. I mean, in our partnership until recently, men were the real decision maker, as in like the partners that made the final decision. Our investment committee were actually male dominated, and so on. It's just a recent phenomenon that we've now onboarded female partners, right? So even at the banks, I see that Dashan Bank board. And so what happens is, you start to talk about gender, and then maybe someone would say, "Sugan lennat bank adallam?" So there's nothing to blame about here, nothing to blame. But the reality is, we're not used to this. So it's actually men. So men would, and this is natural brain, it's mindset. It's not, even with women, I mean, the way we're raised, what we have seen is going to make decisions. We make decisions based on reflexes, not so much analytics. So we actually know men doing great. Okay, so this must be a good thing compared to women. Or we know them being really in the house, right? So unless women come to the leadership position, to the decision-making position, I think one aspect that every firm should look into is getting women in those positions, because then they will understand that women businesses are actually out there. So we need to be intentional about getting women businesses. So obviously, like you've said, networking is super, super important. That I agree. But that is from the founder point of view, but even from an investor point of view, we need to be extremely intentional about saying, we need to talk about gender and how much financing are we going to put for women. So it starts with tracking them. At Dashan we're saying, okay, because now we have 3 board members that are sitting at the board, we're now saying how many of that financing is going to women. It's not easy. It's not easy. Yes, we're not finding a lot. There are they're called CSR type of initiatives that are being put in place, but we need to start building that into the system, into the process. And it's possible, and all banks can actually do that. And of course, I mean, I am very grateful at the National Bank. Now at a policy level, National Bank has said 2 out of the 9 or 12 board directors must be women. And that's how you drive the agenda of women. So there needs to be a policy decision as well at the national level as well. All right? Just to add a few those points as well.
Since answering all of my questions are supposed to be coming at the end, what would you recommend to say now? No, don't worry, you have to do a bit more explanation because I have questions on that recommendation that you made. But let me hand over to Feven what you were saying earlier, and it kind of ties what they're saying. Is that there's a credibility gap issue when it comes to women trying to access finance. Women-owned enterprises or women founders, usually we're expected to show more traction, more valuation, more validation to get that same level of interest, that same level of commitment from investors, from banks. I have had this conversation, I think we were both there when we've been told this, we're like, sorry, I'm getting this. They're like, oh yeah, you guys, unlike men founders, you don't come regularly. They're like, men founders, even if they don't fulfill the criteria, and the bank has a criteria, every bank has like a 2-page criteria, like, do you have this and have that? Like, they don't fulfill half of it, but they come every morning, like religiously as if it's church, and then at the end we get tired and we give them the loan. Like, but you guys, you quit after 4 times. And I was like, I didn't realize my job was to come and sit at the door to ask for money. I was like, I'm thinking, do I have a checkbox? Do I have to check to make sure I get the loan? They're like, no, it's about persistence. So they were like, Feven, she was told, whether you have that land or not, like, you didn't come ask me 20 times. So that was a shock to my system. So that means I have to go to the bank and sit at the door and be nice to the loan officer so I can get a loan, even if you don't have a land. But my question to you is, how have you tried to for your informal networks, close that gap? Like, what things did you do to address the banks not giving us money, not giving you money, to get Chakka where it is today? I can see like your mom.
She knows. Yeah, so I guess like a few different things. I wouldn't say they're necessarily strategic, but rather tactical. I think so. One is, I think once you really start to understand with each conversation and in each interaction, what's the engagement approach that I want to have, and really think about like, am I going in there like swinging and just like get me through the door, or I'm going to go to the president and like just pull some like, you know, out of thin air kind of threats, or am I going to just play very nice and persistent? And so it kind of depends on like, I think the person and also the opportunity. But I would say like whatever is at your disposal is really what you should go with, and just, you know, really faking your confidence until it becomes a part of second nature.
Like, fake it till you make it.
I mean, honestly though, like, you know, because a lot of times, like I remember the first time I think I went to the bank, you know, similarly I had the checklist and, you know, XYZ, and obviously having consulted like much more experienced business owners and entrepreneurs, they had mentioned that, but I didn't understand the extent to which you really just have to be there and like extremely persistent. And not only persistent, you have to find a way to sit and wait for like, you know, some VP or someone to pass and like change. It's just like, it's actually insane, right? But I think, you know, you also realize that that's the game that we're in, unfortunately, and there's not like an alternative. Like, if you really do need that capital, there's a level of like persistence that you have to. So I would go with my laptop and literally sit in a corner, and that at first they thought I was like trying to hack into the system. Like, zero interest, guys. I'm pretty sure it's like the lowest bar threshold for security, so I'm not too worried. No offense. But also I'm like, you know, like just understanding that like you have to be able to maximize, you know, as much as you can. I think my mom is also one of those people, when she goes to government offices, she always has like a book in her bag while she's waiting. So you realize that like I have to use whatever is at my disposal in the time that I have, and the resource that I have, with whatever level of energy I can muster until I get that. I think that's one. The second is because we weren't really able to find any financiers, and to be honest, we weren't actively looking for investors early on. That was a very deliberate decision as well. Until we had proven the business model and had the traction, I wasn't really too keen on fundraising. And so the alternative was that because for us so much of our business and our supply chain really depends on the ability to train and invest in smallholder farmers, especially in like forest areas, which is very remote and a bit challenging. So we applied for grant funding. I think we went through about 32 rejections, and then the 33rd one worked, you know? So I'm just saying that like, so it's just to say that like, there really has to be like this level of like grit and resilience that's very ridiculous and a little bit delusional until you cross a certain threshold, and then it becomes easier. Once you really have access to that first loan or that first source of funding, however small or big it is much easier because you already have that track record, you have the credibility, and then you build on that and you keep leveraging it until you get to kind of where next goes.
So before you hand over your mic, so as you said, you weren't intentional in how you're raising your fund. You weren't looking into funding, but now that you are, from your angle, what would a truly gender intentional investor look like for you? Not just in capital, giving you money, but relationship in the inside. What would that look like for Chakka if you are about to go raise finances?
Okay. So I'll be very honest, guys. So we can also, you know, take it all with a grain of salt. We've done now due diligence with 2 potential investors, and for both of them, the majority of the board is not only women, they're also like women of color, and that was very deliberate for me because I decided I don't want to necessarily have to fundraise from people that don't look like me, that don't represent me. And so that was a very deliberate choice. It's very hard because it's still a very small space, not only within Ethiopia, but also outside of Ethiopia. And so I think to really be able to be that specific, it does take a bit of time and a lot of, you know, having to continue kind of building the business until that can materialize. But that's also a decision that I made because that's something that was important for me.
So, I'm gonna take the question back to Feven. She has to explain. She mentioned earlier about a 2x challenge.
We want to hear more.
We want to know what does that even mean? And then I'm gonna tell a second question. How should entrepreneurs position themselves to meet these benchmarks that are being set for gender smart capital? So if Feven, she said she has her reasons, right? But to attract other gender conscious capital, what does she need to do to herself? Not to exist.
But I have a question for Feven, because she's sort of like already said, oh, I would like to work with gender sensitive or gender smart investors who follow gender inclusive agenda, right? But then you also positioned it as, if I may, you said women with color, right? So right there, isn't that limiting your options? It's natural decision, like I said earlier, because you feel comfortable with people that you relate with cultures that you're okay with, but it's somehow going to limit the positioning that you're taking. Because again, base it on some kind of analysis, if it really makes sense. Now, what does 2X means? 2X challenge, it's a global agenda, where I think it's in Canada in 2018, where leaders came, and of course all this research that women they should contribute to the GDP, or their contribution to the GDP. If we use more gender lens investing, that our GDPs could grow by 10%. So you can imagine, just because we're putting more women into the workforce, or more women into the leadership, more women into making businesses and so on, so GDPs would actually grow. So what they decided is, as a social and a business case, they pulled in capital and said, okay, let's have this 2X challenges, and those companies that will meet these challenges, they'll get some funding, financing, or better returns, i.e. reduced returns from investors, so low-cost financing and so on. So there are about 6 aspects, I believe, 5 of which are really trending. One of them being having women-founded businesses, right? So are you investing? So the question is, are we as Zoscales investing in women-founded businesses? The second one is women in leadership. So are those companies that we're investing in, do they have women CEOs, women in senior management positions? And usually I think 30 to 40%, if I'm not mistaken, the right numbers, you'll find it on the Gender 2X website. And then it talked about workforce. So at least 50% of the workforce of companies that we invest in should be women. Then there's women in the supply chain. So those companies, if we're, for example, we have a soap manufacturing businesses, do we have in our supply chain women-founded businesses, or women who are in that value chain? And then the fifth one is, are we providing products that are or that are targeting women as users, right? So, and if you're compliant, of course, for financial industries is women in or gender-based investments in our portfolios. We also look into it and we sort of commit. So if the investment firm is compliant to one of this, right? You cannot do it all at once. It's very difficult. But if you comply to one of these criteria, then you are effectively a Gender 2X compliant, right? So that's what it basically means, Nasreen. What was the follow-on question? How much what?
No, not how much. My question was, how should they prepare themselves to attracting that gender smart capital?
Very good, very good. So it's really about, again, intentionality, right? You're naturally intentional because you're already targeting women and so on. So women in your products and services, you're targeting them. women in your, you're a woman, so you're effectively, and then in your value chain as well, I think you're targeting women farmers. What else are you doing? So you're effectively a fantastic, candidate for Agenda 2X compliance, right? So position that as your strength. That would be the one thing I would say. That's not the only thing, but it's your real strength, right? And then, of course, we are investors, and we will look at the financials, and we will look at the business case, right? So it needs to make business case sense as well, right? When I say that you don't have to put 100% of all your team needs to be women, no, not at all. We in fact like a bit of a balance, right? So it's not like you need to go all women employee or all something like that. I would not advise you to do that, because it's all about, there are certain things that women bring to the table, and there are also qualities that men bring to the table. So it's always good to balance those two things, but use it as your key selling point to raise financing, because it's really out there for these kinds of businesses.
So I think to rephrase what it says very nicely, when Zoscales is raising their second finances, Chakka is going to be like at the top of the pipeline. So get your books ready. Like a good conversation.
I'm sure Rumi would also love that.
At the top of the pipeline.
Absolutely. There's always other criteria that we look into, but for any investment, by the way. But that this is something you can position. So the financials are important, your character is important, the track record. These are, at the end of the day, we're looking for partnership if it's equity that we're looking for. So this perseverance, character, the qualities, and so on. I agree, some of the questions that are being provided to women are very challenging and risk-averse questions. Normally when an investor looks at a woman, they'll basically want to be certain that the woman is not going to go away from the business when there's creation happening, right? So the questions are more risk averse versus what the question you ask for men are more ambition related questions, growth related questions go to men. So at Zoscales we understand that, and so we're very intentional, and I hope we will be intentional in our selection criteria, whereby we ask both questions. The same criteria should apply to both men-led or women-led or men-founded or women-founded businesses. Yeah.
You're going to do something big. You said you had a question, right? No. Okay. This is going to Mariah. So Renew has been now in this for, I think, what?
13 years.
13 years, but now with your new accelerator program that you have, of which some members, Feven and I are one of the founders, we're so happy about that. What is Renew actually doing in terms of trying to close that gap, as I said, in terms of identifying pipeline of women that you can invest in? And do you feel like you're being successful?
Well, I'm glad that you plugged the ISWA network so that I don't have to. It's a great question. And for those who don't know in the room, the ISWA network is an organization, or is a network that we launched almost 2 years ago now, specifically for women business owners. And, it's not done in a vacuum. We recognize that there are other organizations that are supporting women in different ways, AWIB, CAWE, industrial associations, etc. But we went around and we spent a lot of time talking to women business founders, and we said, what is still missing for you? What specific things do you want? And it's still very much a learning process, and I know that there are a lot of things that we could still do better and improve upon, and our goal is to always keep that feedback loop open and iterate and change to meet the demands of our members. But in order to join, you must own a business or be in a C-suite position. And then we are working on crafting more formalized cohorts within the network, both based on where you are in your business journey, so that if you are, a well-established business who has already been through the ropes, you're sitting down with people who have also reached that level of their business as well. And startups are sitting together and they're talking about the same challenges, but then also creating that space for mentorship to cascade down throughout it. I mentioned earlier about the bringing in the different trainings. We're really trying to focus purely on the business skills side of things. How do you build a financial model? How do you build a marketing plan that has that gender focus on it? Are you going out and asking a room full of men, or are you a room full of men talking about how to market sanitary pads for women? Probably the men are not going to come up with the best solution. So how do you actually build something that is targeting the right customers? And just really, from an investor's perspective, we want to provide the skill set so that when a company comes to us, they're thinking the way that we're thinking. So the trainings that we're providing are as much as we possibly can, attempting not to just be training for training's sake, but really intentionally, these are the things we're going to come and ask you as an investor if you come ask us for money. We want to set you up for success now, build your business with those skills and those organizational structures in place so that you're growing right with your capital. And one of the things that we did a few years back as well was actually build a training program and a guidebook, both for the entrepreneur to build a gender smart business themselves to attract that type of capital, and for other funders, other capital investors to build a gender smart portfolio. And we put that online for free so that anyone wants to access it, and actually now does sit on the 2X website. So the 2X Global has signed off that they see what we've done in embedding gender really into every single one of those lessons, right? So it's not that gender session that immediately most people just turn their brains off. They don't want to think about gender. But we've got gender content in the finance section. We've got gender content in the organizational structure, et cetera. And I think that this session is very much focused on women entrepreneurship, but to the point of how do we have more women in business in general. Gender lens investing is about building gender smart businesses, regardless of who the owner is. So I think that's another important thing to take into consideration. And so we actually tested out that model of how do you take a business that is predominantly run by men in a field that is predominantly considered, a male industry, and test out, can we turn this business into a gender smart business? So many of you in the room probably know Deliver Addis. You might have mixed feelings about it, and that's fine. We can we can have that conversation afterwards. But that is one of the companies that we've invested in. And 2 years ago, we took this guidebook that we built and we said, can we make Deliver Addis a gender smart business? So we used the CEIF scorecard, which goes even one level beyond, I think, the 2X challenge in terms of the nitty-gritty details of how do you build. What are the different factors that make a business gender smart or not? And we came out with a score of 2.5 out of 5 for Deliver Addis's current operations in that moment. And we spent a year diligently working with them. We built out an entire new HR and employee structure handbook. We provided, we went in and assessed the office space. Now they have a dedicated space solely for women to do whatever women need to do during the day, whether that's, pumping milk or, anything. Every single department is now led by a woman. So talking about that part of bringing women up in the leadership positions, it's not just the number of women you've employed, but how far up are they in seniority. We looked at pay equity. We tested out women as drivers, but I think that was maybe a little too ahead of the time for Addis, but now that we're seeing all these bike lanes, maybe things will change there. But anyway, after a year of doing this, we've now reached a score of 4 out of 5, which is considered gender smart and unlocks that 2X capital. So I think there's a lot of ways to think through the gender lens investing piece that don't always put the woman CEO at the forefront, although I think we all would love to see more women CEOs at the forefront. And so, that's an example of trying to build that into the society, because also once you have more gender smart businesses, more women are rising up. They're recognizing that, oh, I can be the CEO, I can be the CFO, and then you're opening new paths for them to go out and launch their own businesses, right? So it's all part of that journey. Another thing that we've been able to do through our programming is last year we were able to take 3 women entrepreneurs to GITEX in Dubai, which is a giant investor and tech conference, and give them that exposure of, you know, other businesses that could potentially be partners, customers, other investors from around the globe. And that kind of goes back to that relational capital piece where Renew has a continental footprint and a global network of investors. The more we can use that to elevate the position of women founders, to expose them to customers, to clients, to funders, and business partners, then you're starting to, again, then they're bringing back those experiences and lessons. They're working with other mentors to get that exposure, and you're starting to elevate Ethiopian women as a force of nature of entrepreneurship. So I think I rambled a little bit there, but is there a second part of that question that I missed?
No, you did not miss your answer, but maybe I can ask one. Sorry. I feel like I'm loud enough to love them. So, can you just tie your answer right now? So you were mentioning that you're commissioning Zoscales and how you're being intentional. Can you maybe highlight to us how donor-led accelerators and private investors can collaboratively work more effectively towards closing that gap when it comes to financing? Because private sector, they have their own demands, right? So which we're telling Feven, this is what you have to do to be part of even our radar for us to consider investing. And then we have that set of programs. You're also putting up all of those trainings and whatever. But what can you two do together to close that gap? So there's a question to the both of you, so you're not making Feven's life hard.
As the representative.
Yes, exactly. Feven represents all the amazing kick-ass entrepreneurs and founders out there.
Yeah, well, and I think when you first also pose this question, there's the conversation about the donor side of things as well, right? And I think this goes back to the training challenge, and incubators and accelerators are very important pieces of a healthy ecosystem. And I don't think that we've reached critical mass nor quality mass of incubators, accelerators, venture studios in the Ethiopian market. That being said, there's also this huge challenge of, in emerging markets across the world, in order to run incubators and accelerators, these are very expensive programs. And so those organizations that want to do that kind of work look to donors for their funding. And well-intentioned as donors may be, they also all come with their expectations, their metrics, their numbers, their SDG priorities. And as an incubator and an accelerator, then to get that funding, you have to meet those targets and you have to go after what they're asking for. And so you see these entrepreneurs that are just in this training cycle. They just bounce from one accelerator, one program to the next, hoping that, oh, this is going to unlock that funding for me. But when they come out, there's no investor that's interested in, I'm not going to create a suggest a business example in case there's anyone in the room with these businesses, but they have a great business idea, they go through the training, and then they come out on the other side and there's no money for their business. And so then they, that's that cycle that they get trapped in. And what I really wish that we as a development community, as an investment community, as an entrepreneurial support ecosystem did a better job of is start with the money. Where is the money? And then design the program backwards from there. What is Zoscales looking at? What is Renew Capital looking at? What is whatever the other investor funder, who are the businesses that they're going to invest in? Now let's design a program that builds them a pipeline. It may leave out some of the businesses that we want and we need in these ecosystems, and we need to have those conversations as well. But at the end of the day, we want to support entrepreneurs. We want to see successful businesses. We want to build success stories that show international investors Ethiopia is a great place to come and invest in. But if Zoscales doesn't have pipeline, if we don't have pipeline, then we're never going to be able to convince others to bring money in as well. And so if the donors could rather than impose their objectives, go to the investors. What's your pipeline? What are you looking for? And then you design those accelerator programs around that. All of a sudden, Zoscales is closing more and more investments. New Capital is closing more and more investments. And you're starting to build an ecosystem because then those successful entrepreneurs are highlighting to young Ethiopians that this is a viable path. You know, you don't have to go get the job at the bank right out of college. You can go out and test and try a business model and fail and try again because you're seeing those success stories. And so I really wish that that is how we could all collaborate in the ecosystem to unlock that capital and showcase the potential of this ecosystem.
I think we have probably over 1 hour. Should we give the audience a chance to ask you guys questions so you guys can listen to your opinions?
Yeah.
Introduce yourself, where you're coming from, your question, and who exactly it's aimed at.
Thank you so much. Really glad to be here because, okay, just to introduce myself, my name is Hannah and I'm from Esete and I'm working as a gender expert. And I'm really glad to see those investors and investing experts talking about gender. This is the first time, by the way. Whenever you are talking about gender, it should be, the gender person that sits and talk about it. But if you want to see the gender aspect of anybody, you can see it. It's so observable. And I believe that everyone is a gender expert by themselves if they want to be. So my first question will go for Feven. I'm really glad that you are looking to this business of yours. I have also bought some of your products. So
Well done.
You mentioned that you are working with women, and that it's very good. But I want to know, why women? Is it because you're a very good person, or because there is a benefit towards that? So I don't want people to think that we're only focusing women because it's a kind of a benefit because it's a business for you too. So why women? And also about the sustainability issue, you mentioned that you had this Esete fund. I'm not sure, but there was this grant that you managed to get at first, but now you're just shifting to the investors. And how was you able to do that? Because many of these the startups are really struggling, and they just base their finance in terms of grants, and it was visible that they are growing back. So how do you see that one? And of course for Esete, I have two questions for you. So one is about the mindset of the bias that you were mentioning. I mean, we all have that bias. I even have it. And what can we do? What shall we do about it? We really talk about it, but it's quite very hard for me. And you also mentioned that you had a good practice, seeing that women CEOs do perform in investments in a very good way. And do you really have this platform of sharing those good practices? Because I tried to search for a kind of evidence, and I was unable to find any that has focused in Ethiopia. Do you have any kind of contribution towards that one? How are you really sharing? And for Mariah, also about the relational capital, I think networking is what really is going to be there, but I'm telling you, I have been in touch with many women, and when we just tell them to network, they will say, no this time. And how can we, push them for that level of engagement? Because I'm not sure about their interest, or I'm not sure about their challenge, but they really do need it. We really do need it. And how do you think that we can change that?
I'm gonna cut you. You have
questions?
I think let's collect the questions and then we can cover.
Yes.
Hi everyone, I am Ruth. I founded an educational
company called Edit, so I can come there. I hope you guys can see me. I'm back here.
No, we don't.
So my question is for Esete and Mariah, and it's about tokenization. So we see a lot of people. It's not actually it's not genuinely that they have women founders or they represent women, but it's just as a token. I know a lot of people, entrepreneurs, that when they have to apply for grants or when they have to pitch, they pick, they take women with them. Like it could even be, their sister or their friends, but we see that a lot, I think, and even in the donor sector, we see this representation or this tokenization as a PR stunt, and I would assume that it has a great effect on a lot of the things that we're talking now. It would give false numbers, one, and I would like to hear more about that. One, about the consequences of this issue, and the other, what would you guys do in these spaces to ensure that this representation is genuine and it's not just for optics? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It's glad to be here. My name is Mariah. I'm from Somali region. I'm based there, but we cannot be navigating or planning to move to this because I can see more opportunities here than the Somali region. So I have been engaged in entrepreneurship for the last couple of years, 4 to 3 years. And also, I'm an entrepreneurship trainer at the same time. I'm national certified trainer by ILO. So I'm someone who is passionate about just learning from the other entrepreneurs and at the same time contributing to them. So in the other hand, I'm the eldest and of 6. So I took a quality from there that I would like just to put myself out there, so I can experience things, then I can mentor the others.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I have been creating startups, some of them failing, some of them currently working. I build them on that previous experience. But now I'm in a position that I need to know more about investment related issues. So that's why I was lately more into searching about any investment because earlier this year I challenged myself crazily about to consider 2 elite week here, and every 2 elite weeks that I consider a year to come up with a new business. So only within this year I'm in number 1. The first one is a perfume shop. It's working. In Chakka, the second one is skincare. I was telling her today about it. So natural skincare, basic products. But for someone who wants to build every 12 weeks, come up with a new business, that actually something that adds value at the same time empowering women or youth in general, definitely you will need a capital. So basically, my question is, I would like someone to adopt me. So what do you I like guidance and mentoring and just showing me the way. So that's my action. Thank you.
Last one.
Hi everyone, Salam. This is Tsehaye. I'm the CEO and founder of DNA Health. We are a women's health startup here in Ethiopia. So I have 2 questions, mainly for the investment panelists, but maybe perhaps I'll just kind of do a quick context around my question. So, when we talk about gender-led investment, I think there's one piece that we didn't really dive into in the conversation, right? So I think when I look at the landscape here in Ethiopia, there's 2 types of organizations or women-led organizations that we can invest in, especially in the business space. There are businesswomen, one woman that perhaps inherited her family business that's running, a construction company or a baking company that has been around. been passed down, now she's leading the business. Then there's people like us that are startup entrepreneurs, that are creating something that's scalable, more, modernized, or using NVIDIA technology and so on. That's quite new, more newer than the privatization space in Ethiopia. Entrepreneurship space is quite new. So as investors, the pathway for investment for an entrepreneur versus a traditional business, whether it's ran by both ran by women, is quite different, and how we're perceived the ecosystem is different. So I want to understand, how do you guys think about this, and is that something that you distinguish? I don't think it's quite fair to say that they're both one size fits all, right? They both have their pros and cons and strengths and weaknesses, right? So I want to understand how you guys think of that. And then my other question is around, earlier you guys talked about the burden of care. I think it's really important, and how, networking is important and building that. But when I was thinking about women that are doing the work that I'm doing as well here, founders, CEOs, they don't quite fit that typical Ethiopian woman stereotype anymore, right? They're not the ones that are prioritizing family first. They're actually sacrificing these things to put their business first. They're missing out on these things, and they're actually fitting this non-traditional norm nowadays. So when I think about them, I think about myself, and I think about how we're very active in making sure that we are in these rooms when it comes to funding or other businesses. But yet a lot of us don't get funding still. Zero in our own country, in our own ecosystem. Of course, the investment space is still developing as well. So I want to ask, it's great to see that you guys are also both, in decision-making spaces at these entities. But I want to ask, what is the amount of capital your organization has actually deployed factually today? What have you done? What have you invested in women-led businesses? And how does that compare to male-led companies that you invested in? So I just wanted to kind of just get those numbers if you have that. Thank you.
What would the...
Yeah, questions. Actually, let's do this. Let's answer at least the first few.
Yeah.
And then we give back the mic again.
Yeah.
Okay, one.
I'm sorry.
We will email
That's
you the
it,
answer.
right.
I know. Before I
First of all, I'm so happy to see you, Stephen.
Likewise, is that?
Everybody made that my only one team. I'm so happy to see you guys. Feven as well, so proud of you. Thank you all for your insights, Smith. And I'm being asked to get it because I have to go in 5 minutes. I may not hear the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. I think before I ask the question, I just want to echo what the Esete said. And I think this is just for the rest of you, for it to serve as encouragement to be resilient. Things are hard, and I completely echo. I'm in the ag space myself and work with women, and I can also explain why I work with women at a different time then. These things take time, and so if you just see it as kind of the path to go through to get to where you have to, I think you'll be able to stay in it a lot longer. It's not to say that there aren't challenges, but I feel as though we have a lot of isolated conversations about why this isn't happening, why this isn't happening. So we tend to get a little bit more discouraged than we should. But I really do encourage everybody else in the space to remain, make your networks, and leverage that social capital. However, and my question is to Nasreen. I say this, sorry. Overcoming a little cold. So we have the investment community here, and somehow the development, you mentioned yourself as a development member, but there's still a question for me. There's money from banks here. And the question remains, you can look at them, but there's a how is this going to happen part. And so for me, the big part is an awareness. Gender lens in Betsy, but it's just at this point it becomes something that's not accessible. And so I feel like people like you are very well positioned and step in there and accelerate that side of the conversation, because there's an element I agree with you, which is a very different group of Ethiopian women entrepreneurs that can maybe access and have conversations with the likes of Esete and you. However, there are others that can't, where the banks are immediately more accessible enough. While I think these conversations are great, I would like to know, though I may not hear the answer, so you call me and tell me, but what do firms like you have in mind in terms of plugging in on the policy side, accelerating the knowledge development, enabling the decision making now that we have increased board membership? This is very critical. Yes, because otherwise it becomes, I think, a conversation fatigue. Like everybody's doing their own thing, but then really, okay, well, this is also useful. There's also inspiring people of capital here, and this need to grow. So my question is really, one, I'm very grateful for the inputs from here.
Thank you very much. She's putting you on the spot.
Thank you for your engaging questions. So why women? Indeed, it wasn't just about some benevolent act, but because in our sector especially, when it comes to the cultivation and post-harvest for herbs in particular, there's a certain level of attention to detail and quality that genuinely women are better at. And so they also traditionally are the ones who care for a lot of it was a matter of how do we get that to scale so that there's sufficient volume and aggregated quality at the end of the harvest season. And so that was a very deliberate choice that also just worked in our favor, to be honest. But it also created an encouragement to look across our supply chain. So if we have options for packaging suppliers, we'll at least get to identify if there's a woman-owned business that is already in that sector. This is actually something that I think we brought up to a few of the banks and saying, why can't you at least have you have a lot of the information about who's in what sector, etc. Why don't you just provide a database to at least for people to be able to access so that they have that choice of information. So for us, it was a very convenient, but also somewhat deliberate choice. I think the second question was around, so it wasn't actually that, so USAID had only provided the collateral for a bank loan. So they have these programs that some of the donors will occasionally kind of give access for businesses and entrepreneurs. But a lot of times, it's literally through 5 degrees removed of information to be able to even know which bank is part of that. And usually, unless you go from the part of the donor, it's really hard. The bank, people who even work at the bank might not even know that this program exists. So a lot of times, it's been through, at least for me, was networking through the donor and the investment circles that I was able to get the information on which of the banks have this program and asking specifically for an introduction with person X who's in decision making, etc., to be able to access that. So it's a lot of that, the networking part is just cannot be denied. And I'm also happy to speak on behalf of the SAW Network and saying that it is a really good opportunity for all of you who are here. Definitely ask both Mariah and also Leos, she hasn't left yet, to see if you could join the next meeting, because it is a very good opportunity and it feels more accessible. And part of the reason why I haven't joined any other associations, not because I'm sure they're great, but because it felt very daunting, massive, and in the hundreds and thousands, and that's not necessarily what I'm looking for. I prefer more of these types of let's say environments and circles and groups of people where it's much easier to have a one-on-one discussion and to really go into depth instead of breadth. I hope that answers the question. And apologies, I have a call at 6:30, so I'm going to
Okay, I hope I remember all questions directed to me. If I don't, we can you can ask. Yeah. So the first one is bias. How do we handle that? Right. I think step one is, do we recognize them? Right. So we should recognize that we have biases. So what we do is and then this is, like I said, it's a natural thing. It's not, it's not like. But if we recognize that we have biases, then what do we do into our systems, into our processes? How do we embed them? We need to learn. Even at Zoscales, we're learning. We're learning gender lens investing as we speak. Different sessions are there. So people need to be intentional about learning it. Then the next one is you embed them in your processes and so on, but then you have to measure it. You have to set KPIs, you have to set targets, and you need to be able to measure those things. So it's not going to go away. It might take even generation to, women empowerment or feminism, whatever. It's those agendas in the 90s, 30s have resulted in for example, where the West is at today, right? So we need to go through that movement as well. I would say that. So the other thing, sharing your good experiences. We do have our impact reports that comes out. We're not maybe super loud into the media because we have limited capital as well, but we have impact reports that come out every year. if not semi-annually, I think every year. So on our LinkedIn pages, you'll find those impact investments. And one of this, this impact that we look for is gender equality. And so you'll see that. There are other impacts that we also follow through among the SDGs, health and wellness, quality jobs, and so on. But in those reports, you can actually find them. Where we really talk about gender is, I have to say, is when it's March 8th. Okay, that's when we all talk, women in leadership, all our CEOs, we send flowers, we send cakes, and so on. So we tend to celebrate those. The other question I have here is around maybe tokenization. So if I understand it correctly, that what you meant is, they're not really abused, right? So they're not, if that's the correct interpretation. So, everything that's on the SDGs is actually, in a way, like if you talk about climate, it's like greenwashing and this and that. Now, how do we make sure that this is not just a false information? I think in our investment processes, we actually sit down and we have clear measures, right? We sit down. It's not like, there are, for example, women-led businesses. I have a friend, and DBE has women, funds for women-led businesses. And what my friend does is he makes sure that the license is in his wife's name, but he's the one really running the business. So it doesn't matter. That's also a good step. Let's go for it. So, but it's not, for us, we have responsibilities. It's not just, we cannot just say it for the sake of saying it, because we are investors. We have investors to report to. We have fiduciary duties. And our investors are looking to these matrices very carefully, very diligently. So it's not a tokenization thing when we talk about genderless investing. Unless we do it, we'd rather not do it. And when we say genderless investing, please do not only take it as women-founded companies. It's also about gender-inclusive businesses. So at Zoscales, we've said, in terms of commitment, we have committed for gender inclusion because we feel we won't get enough in our pipeline for gender investment. The other question that probably I think I have is around how much have you invested and so on. I think our data are quite public. So we have raised $70 million and we've invested in 6 companies, 5 of which, or 4.5, are in Ethiopia, and then the rest is in Kenya. And we've invested in healthcare. So Pioneer Diagnostics, for example, is one of our investment in healthcare. We have a hospital in Kenya. And we are also focused on FMCG. We've invested in soap and detergent, crown cork manufacturing, biscuit manufacturing. Now, in our first investments in the first fund, we were never, we were using, like I said earlier, the traditional approach to sourcing deals, but we were intentional about tracking these numbers on gender. And what we have found out is that, if we focus more on gender-inclusive businesses, then, our returns could improve and so on. So we now talk from facts. We don't talk from social case, but we actually talk about facts here. We don't do early stage deals. We focus on more mature, we still call them SMEs, but they're really mature businesses that we focus on. I think Renew, maybe you can, take it from here.
Thank you very much. I'll probably bounce around a little bit and you can just catch me where I'm steering off course. But I think on the tokenization and the questions around how do you make sure that gender is being taken seriously, mostly just echoing the same sentiments. But, you have to be a gender smart business yourself as an investor. And, I think you alluded to that as well, or said it, bringing more women into the decision-making room is obviously going to impact the investment decisions. And so I think it's very important that investors are practicing what they're preaching and practicing their own gender smart review of their business. We do pretty well, but we only have one woman on our investment committee right now, for example, our co-founder. So I think there's still room for that to improve. On the investments that Renew Capital has done, and I think this also goes back to that sort of building the tiers of capital and building the pipeline. We are an early stage investor, so our ticket sizes are significantly smaller, but I think we also have the opportunity to do more conversing with the likes of Zoscales, because at some point we want to exit out of the investments we make, right? So if we're an early stage investor and they're a mature investor, naturally we should be saying, well, what's your pipeline? What are you looking for? And we should be considering companies that would match that. And then, going down the line, the incubators and the accelerators should be coming to us. What are we looking for? And building us pipeline, right? So there's so many opportunities to build those different rungs of pipeline. My three colleagues who are here ran out of the room to try and bring me all the numbers to answer the question about the money side of things. But we have over 51 investments across the continent. 39 of those are active, and the rest we have since exited, or in some cases the businesses didn't work out. As I mentioned earlier, Renew Capital has been in Ethiopia for 13 years, so I think at least 17 of those companies are here in Ethiopia. In the past 18 months, we've closed 4 investments, so we are active. We are still doing those levels of, doing that investing here in Ethiopia. The ratio of women-owned businesses is not as high as we would like it, but we do make the commitment that any company that comes into our portfolio must become gender smart, and we help them along that process in the same way that we did with Deliver Addis. And we actually provide financial incentives for them to do that. So once they reach a certain score on that CEEF scorecard I mentioned, the term sheets actually change, and an entire percentage point of that financial commitment is reduced. And we do the same thing for ESG as well. So once again, we believe that being gender smart is good business sense, but we know that there's still a learning curve for convincing all the businesses that makes sense as well. And so we actually give them that financial incentive in order to do that. I think that you pretty much covered the rest of the things, and I don't want to repeat or take too much time, but is there any question that we missed?
I feel like I didn't answer this question. There's one person who's been raising her hand, and I was
Thank you. Hi everyone. Thank you so much for the insightful conversation. My name is Mariah. I'm the founder and CEO of Fox. We're trying to build a better booking place for anyone that hosts events. And my question goes out to Maya, but you can also answer as well. You said follow the money, but we also want to make sure that we follow competence. And I think Nasreen can also help me with this. So for me, right now, we're trying to raise and we're looking for investors, right? But we also want to make sure that money is not the only issue. We want to scale. So how do we make sure that we approach investors that actually can back up what they say? And also, is there an investor notebook that we can look into and refer and say, okay, this is an investor that is right here for you.
I'll just start since I've got the mic, and that also comes back to your question as well that I don't think was really addressed yet in terms of how do you find funding. And I applaud you all because it is not an easy game. It's much easier to look at a company and decide than it is to be the company going out and sourcing the capital. I think in terms of finding the right investor, it's a time-intensive relationship building process. It's having the conversations. It's looking at the board structure. As Feven was mentioning, she's specific. She identified this is the criteria that I have for a partnership in investing, and I'm only going to source investors that meet that criteria. So I think first identify what's important to you, and then start to do the research. I do know that EASE and Ministry of Innovation did produce like an ecosystem landscape map that has a list of investors, but the level of detail that you're going to want to find, you can start with the internet research, but it's really going to be tracking them down, setting up meetings, having those conversations, and really getting to understand, is this someone I want to be in partnership with? Because an investment is a partnership. In many ways that you go dating to find your partner as a husband or wife, you need to do the same thing with investors. And then to go to your question about how do you find funding, I think one thing that will be, it's amazing what you're seeking to do, 12 weeks, a new business every 12 weeks. Very ambitious, very exciting. Investors are going to look for traction and history, right? And so I think to find funding for businesses that are 12 weeks old is going to be very difficult. And they're going to question where your commitment and where your focus is, right? So they're not going to invest in the idea of new businesses, they're going to invest in a single business at a time, right? And so if there's an anchor business that you think you can really build that traction and build into something that would be attractive to investors, then you can start to step away from the daily activities of that business once it's up and running, and that will allow you more time to build those other businesses. I think it's going to be very difficult to find money like that for those very young businesses, but that is also where that grant funding and that donor community can play a role. Obviously, that's becoming more and more difficult with the way that the development field is going, but those programs do still exist. As Feven mentioned, the USAID program helped her get some of that early stage capital that she needed. And so that goes back to, it takes time, it takes research, it takes relationship building. So I'll let you build on that.
So it's a good question. I'll just maybe touch upon, you've touched it entirely, just on technical assistance and technical expertise, right? I think more than the money and the funding, businesses they have to be ready technically. Because a lot of time, we're technically ready, or we need funding. We always say money at the end of the day is to do something, right? But it needs that technical expertise, the know-how, the leadership, the governance, and so on, to actually take the business to another level. One can be on their specific area of expertise, they could be good. One of the big challenges that I see is, I am probably, so let's say some businesses, I'm probably a nurse, right? And then all of a sudden I want to build a hospital, right? Nursing is one thing, but running a hospital is another thing, right? So and that nurse, you're establishing a business, you need to know how to also lead a business, right? Those kinds of technical assistance, usually with fundings comes the TA facilities. In all of our businesses, we effectively bring on, our investors actually gives us TA facilities whereby we actually hire some consultant. It could be on ESG, it could be on gender, it could be on that specific business, it could be on supply chain, route to market, what have you. Usually funders, they come with a TA facility. So, and that's very important. Like working on the technical skills, like you said, is quite important. And it comes usually with the package.
I think I feel like I'm going to get a whole pass for not answering that question that this has asked. What are we doing in terms of trying to move the needle in terms of from ACE perspective? I think I've been having this conversation so many times with colleagues and friends. Esete kind of mentioned it. She's like, it's a mindset thing. It's a bias, but like no one talks about it, but we know it's the elephant in the room. And I think it has frustrated me, at least as a person, so much that where I said, okay, I want to talk about it in a platform that makes sense to me, where I can bring people that understand what we're trying to do, that want to push the needle, that are frustrated or feel like I have a solution to it, or they can make a recommendation as to how things can change. So for me, it was, okay, how can I create that platform? I didn't want gender to be a checkbox. Most of these forums that we attend, and I believe that I've even been a part of, or I've been asked to like be on the panel or this and that, some of them really think about what value does she add, but it was like, okay, she's a female, this or her. She looks good on our resume to have her there, which really offends me, but that's simply the reality of it. So instead of me saying why, I would rather still go on that stage and actually make a statement about it, right? So for me, whatever makes an impact, whatever that is, whether it's being on their panel or sitting at that event, my say is don't keep quiet, say something. Like always people are like, oh, she said it, so it's fine, I'm not saying anything about it. Like no, like it all comes from the collective. Not just one person, but all of us together will actually make a change. So from its perspective, how can we create that platform for us, for our one voice to sound not just one, but like collectively it has more, is my thought process. I think I can answer one or two of your questions there. You say, can you give us a notebook? I think a half a page should be more than enough if we're intentional in terms of who are these investors that are willing to invest in us. Admittedly, women entrepreneurs versus men, we are expected, as I said earlier on, to present more, to validate more in terms of your traction and scale. But the reality of it, Esete has also said, they're not just investing in your company, they're also investing in your character. Does that person, is he or she is an entrepreneur? Does she have the grit to ask for that money? And then what is she gonna spend it on? And is she actually gonna make something out of it? They're not just investing in your company, they're also investing in you. They're also looking at those things. And of course, if you have the guts to ask for $10,000 or be it $10 million, you actually have a plan for it. It depends on who you're asking for. I feel like sometimes our frustration is aimed at the wrong people. You're like standing here yelling at them like, I want this amount of money, but your company is still an idea stage. You can't be going there asking things that you have not yet planned for. So that's my personal perspective, at least I want they can make or not to it. But I think in terms of the public institutions, the government, my technique is name and shame. I have done this so many times. So what I do is I go to these events and I listen, and if I feel like the government is saying things or regulatory laws that don't make sense to me, I stand and name and shame them. I'm like, what have you actually done? If your numbers don't make sense to me, then I don't mind saying it because I don't want to be a guinea pig to you guys making your reports with fancy, but not doing anything in reality. I think I have done this so many times to so many different organizations. That's how you can get some reaction sometimes out of some people. Like, what have you done? I want concrete actions to what things you're going to do. And that's how we try to get at least some form of address to some of our issues. I'm going to close off this thing. No, you can't ask questions. Some people have to go home. And I'm told we were here all the time as a character, but I want to ask these two panelists, what's that one thing that you guys believe would bring a shift in terms of investing in women-owned enterprises, gender-less investing, right? One that, well, not one, I know we have several things that we have to do, but that one important thing you believe should be done to move that needle, at least to move that one step forward.
At a policy level, or?
It can be policy level, it can be mindset level, it can be systemic change.
Small
Sure.
question.
Go ahead. I think if it's one thing that I wish I could see would be women raising capital, so more women into the industry, so women going into the fundraising. And it's not just necessarily dollar coming in, it's like women sitting in this room trying to say, okay, let's put capital together, raising that fund. So it could be a 10 million good fund. Then you don't have to wait and queue because you have a gender smart investing already embedded into the system. So the more women come into the ecosystem, it's much easier to make changes happen. So I would say that, of course, at policy level, there will be plenty, but we're in the right direction, so I don't want to complain a lot.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and also something that, I think we're all in this room because we're excited and eager about women in business and gender lens investing and everything, but I think we also need to reflect on women in business are not always very supportive of each other. And I think that that's a great idea, or we need to see more women uplifting women and women investing in women. There's a lot of very successful women business owners in this country. If they can look down their supply chain at smaller businesses that they're sourcing from and start angel investing, then you're starting to build local capital, women investing in women, you're starting to change the narrative. So it wasn't my idea, but I think that is probably like a really great place to start, and it goes to that mindset idea, right? I mean, shifting the mindsets of women in business, society around women in business, and until we start having those mindset shifts and we're seeing those success stories and we're seeing the belief in it, we're not going to get to the policy changes, right? So like that mindset piece, I think, is very important, and that burden is going to be on us as women to help men get there, right? And fair or not, I think that's where we're at. And so if we can just start that trend and that motion, then we'll start to see the other pieces come into place more.
Okay, I want to close this off session by sounding smart, right? And enlightened. I was at this session. Last week I went to Japan to attend the Impact Investment Summit. It was a room full of 100+ people that are obsessively thinking, how can we mobilize funds to spend or to invest in impact areas? And half of that room, I'm very happy to say, were women. They were women changemakers, they were women investors in there. I was like surprised. In my mind, I was like, oh, it's going to be awesome, like 500 people. Half of them, and they were all brilliant and exceptional women. And one of those women sitting in that room, I don't know if you know her, but her name is Osaka. She's the first president of Nigeria Bank, and she's now the board chairman. A brilliant person, brilliant person. And she said at the end of it, alone we can achieve a lot, but together we can transform systems. Her message that day was, impact is collective. Whether we're investors in Nigeria, investors in Nairobi, or partners across the globe, our shared commitment to women's empowerment is what moves the needle. And I was like, wow, I love this, I'm actually going to say this. So that's what I was saying earlier. Impact together will move that needle. So we might disagree on how we want things done, we might disagree, we might face challenges, but our vision should always stay at the forefront of what we want to do. Because I think behind every funding gap, every barrier, there's a woman entrepreneur trying to make a difference, trying to make an impact in whatever way she believes is right. So our question should be, how can we collectively help towards that? It might be a phone call to a person that you know, to help that person have a meeting. It might be me calling the National Bank advisors to have a meeting, say how can we change our policy, have a conversation. It might be calling Esete to advise me on how I can rewrite the financial model. But it's in the collective. How can we support each other to actually get there? So I think if we're intentional in our collaboration, if we're intentional about how we want to do things, if we're keeping at the forefront of our mind, I think we can shift that needle to be there. Thank you. I want to thank our sponsors. When we say we are women-led, we actually mean it. All of our sponsors are women-owned entrepreneurs. There are refreshments out there. We have a company called Romi Health. They produce fresh, organic, healthy juices. Please go out and enjoy it. And our food is being provided by La Nouvelle. That's also another women-owned enterprises. Please go out and have fun.
Thank you. Thank you. Well done, though. So proud.